Negotiations between Canelo Alvarez and Caleb Plant have collapsed, or between the two teams to be precise. Now, Mike Coppinger has reported on this. He's spoken to Caleb Plant, and Plant has given his side of the story. He said, his bark is bigger than his bite, and this is Caleb Plant talking here, quotes from him. He said, Canelo was offered the highest guarantee of his career. He was set to make $40 million plus Mexican TV rights and his Hennessy sponsorship. No problem, let's fight. We gave it to him. Then he wanted upside of gate and pay-per-view revenue. No problem, let's rumble. It was always agreed that it was a unification, no rematch for either fighter. Towards the end of negotiations, they asked for a rematch when they lose. No problem, you can have the rematch as well. I just want to fight. No arguments about money or any stipulations. He then goes on to talk about ridiculous requests from Canelo Alvarez. So one of them here, he says, one that is absurd. If I get injured or sick, then he gets a late replacement for the same amount of guaranteed money. But if he gets injured or sick, then we've got to wait for him. We're at 7.5 weeks from the fight. We've lost valuable time that should be spent promoting and drug testing for a fight of this magnitude. I question whether legacy or money is their real motive. We've been waiting for him to get done with his wedding, shooting his TV show, his golf tournament, and now have tried to give him everything he wants and more to make this fight. I'm more than willing, able, and ready to fight Canelo Alvarez on any date. Those are the real facts, and if anyone has something to say differently, we have the paperwork to prove it. So those are the words of Caleb Plant speaking to ESPN Mike Coppinger. Now, we do need to hear from Canelo's team, their side of the story, because there are two sides to every story. One of the things which didn't get mentioned in this particular, well, it does get mentioned in the article, but it doesn't get mentioned by Caleb Plant, and that is the fact that the fight was set to be on Fox pay-per-view. So this would have been a PBC show. Now, bear in mind, Canelo Alvarez is a free agent. As a free agent, he's going over to Caleb Plant's network. It's not like Canelo's choosing and oh, come over to my network, come and do this, come and do that. No. Canelo's willing to go over to Caleb Plant's network. Right? This is home territory for Caleb Plant, promotionally speaking. So it's not like Canelo wanted everything and was conceding nothing. No, he conceded that one thing, didn't he? That they were going to fight on Fox. Now, there might be things that Caleb Plant is not privy to with regards to demands from the network, maybe demands from PBC of Canelo Alvarez. Let's say there was no rematch clause in place, or maybe there was a rematch clause in place for the Caleb Plant fight. Do we know that Fox and PBC didn't want options on Canelo regardless? I'd heard rumors that PBC initially wanted Canelo for a 3-fight deal. So that would have been 2 against Caleb Plant, right? Or potentially 2. And then the 3rd fight against somebody else. Maybe Benavidez. So, again, this is something we have to consider. The industry doesn't tend to like independent fighters. They always seem to want a piece of a fighter. Now, if you are somebody who is nowhere near the level of a Canelo Alvarez in terms of the amount of clout you have in the game, the amount of money you're making, the level of your stardom, then a 3-fight deal is absolutely no problem at all. In fact, you should jump at that. If you're offered career high money and it's a 3-fight deal, one of them's an undisputed unification, then there's no reason to turn it down. But when you're a Canelo Alvarez and you hold all the aces, you're really in a position of power. And the networks don't like that. A lot of the promoters don't like that. A lot of these people, the corporate types, look down at fighters. They feel incensed by A guy, young guy, usually coming from poverty, perhaps doesn't come from a very educated, doesn't have a high degree of education. And they can get real snobbish about the individual and say, why should we be acting like this guy is dictating to us? A lot of people in the industry are like that. A lot of corporate types are like that. They have this kind of attitude of who does this little boxer think he is? You see? And this is why they want to arrange a dynamic where they have power over the fighter. Mayweather will tell you this throughout his career, how the industry did not like the fact that he was independent. So, again, I don't know the ins and outs behind the scenes, why this negotiation has currently broken down. Could it just be Canelo being a diva? Of course it could. Again, I'm not privy to what goes on behind the scenes here, but I'm just putting possibilities out there based on all I know about boxing, based on experience, based on all the different factors that I can see as an outsider looking in. And I'll be very surprised because, think about it. Canelo Alvarez is a free agent, but he has attached himself to Eddie Hearn. He doesn't have a long-term promotional contract with Eddie Hearn as far as I'm aware, but he's come out in recent months waxing lyrical about how Eddie Hearn's the best promoter in the world by far and all this kind of stuff. So in the short term, if you're PBC Fox, sure, we'll have Canelo Alvarez over. If he beats our guy, at least we make a load of money. But in the longer term, look at it. Canelo's now undisputed, and he's still attached to this guy, Eddie Hearn, who's our main rival, or one of our main rivals. Where's he really going to go? Is he going to stay with us on Fox, or is he going to go back with Eddie with all those belts to the zone? He's probably going to do that. And how does that make us look? This must be what the corporate types at PBC and Fox are thinking. It makes their brand look bad, right? If somebody else comes and snatches up the last belt, becomes undisputed, a huge superstar, bigger than ever, and he's on their rival network against, with their rival promoter. They don't want that. They would like to be more compensated than that, if possible. So, again, I'm not privy to what goes on behind the scenes. All of us can only speculate. There are two sides to every story. Perhaps Canelo was making unrealistic or strange demands. But at the same time, PBC have a history of not allowing their fighters to take not only career high money, but a type of deals which they may never see again. Adam Kaunaki was advised or perhaps prevented from taking the Anthony Joshua fight. So was Luis Ortiz. So was, most famously, most infamously, Deontay Wilder. Over $100 million deal. Well, he's not seeing that kind of money anywhere else anytime soon, is he? Turned it down on the advice of Shelley Finkel and whoever else was whispering in his ear. And of course, we've got the situation at welterweight with Terence Crawford seemingly being frozen out by PBC for a number of years. Errol Spence talking about cross the street and all this rubbish. We don't want to hear that. We want to hear about you fighting Terence Crawford in a unification. We don't want to hear about nothing about cross the street. You see, so PBC, look, all major promotional entities are going to want to do as many in-house fights as they can. But some are more willing to do cross-promotional stuff than others. And with PBC, they appear to be the most insular promotional company in boxing, at least in the United States. Very insular. very incestuous. Of course, they do let some of their fighters out to have cross-promotional fights. Andy Ruiz, of course, he'd only just joined PBC when they sent him over to fight Anthony Joshua. But, you know, if you look at their history, as I say, they tend to be more insular than the other promotional companies. And I think there's also an element here, to some degree, of Fox and ESPN teaming up against DAZN to some extent. I think that's going on too. And I think you see that reflected with some of the collaborations that are done between PBC and ESPN, you know, PBC and Top Rank, should I say. They tend to work together more than, from what I've seen anyway, they like working with Eddie Hearn and DAZN. Now, ESPN has worked with Eddie Hearn fighters several times, but you look at a fight like, for example, Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. Cross-promotional, cross-network, but yet they can't seem to get the same thing done with DAZN. And again, I suspect that some of that is down to the old guard in the American boxing establishment teaming up against the new guard in Eddie Hearn, DAZN, the new players on the block. I mean, Frank Warren talked about that when he first came into the boxing promotional game. This is in the UK, of course. How the old promoters, Jarvis Astaire and all these guys, Mickey Duff, teamed up against him. And even when Eddie Hearn came on the scene in the UK, Frank Warren and Maloney and all these other guys basically tried to team up against Eddie Hearn. So this is a common thing in business, certainly in boxing, of the old guard teaming up against a new person, a new promotional company, a new network, which is going to disrupt the established order. So look, again, all of this may not have any bearing on the negotiations for Canelo Caleb Plant breaking down. But I do have to put it out there as a possibility. That's all. Again, for the final time, it's very possible that it is just Canelo being mega maniacal, a control freak, a diva. Could very well be the case. But it could also be the case that the industry don't like an independent fighter having this much power. And that if he's not willing to submit to them to a degree of their satisfaction, then they're not going to allow him to have this final piece of the jigsaw puzzle and become undisputed against Caleb Plant. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Hopefully, we get more information about this story in the days to come. Best case scenario, they can iron out any issues and the fight can still go ahead. If not, we at least, I certainly would, like to hear from Canelo Alvarez, Eddie Hearn, and so on in terms of their side of the story. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below about what's going on here. And again, I don't like to dwell on the negative, but if it has got something to do with PBC being a very insular, incestuous promotional company and not wanting their fighters in many instances to go ahead and have these cross-promotional fights, could we see something similar happen to the Terence Crawford-Sean Porter fight? Because Porter has been mandated now to fight, well, the other way around really. Terence Crawford has been mandated to fight Sean Porter being his mandatory challenger. Could it be that PBC say, nah, you know what? Unless we can get, when they can't get any rights on Terence Crawford as far as I'm aware, because he's still got a couple fights left on his Top Rank contract, correct me if I'm wrong. So could they just come in and block the fight altogether? Say, nah, Sean, you're not taking that. We're going in a different direction. We've got other plans for you. Could that happen? I hope not. But you look at PBC's track record and you can't write it off at the very least. And why did PBC do this? Because it's all about perception. PBC want to create the perception that they have all the greatest fighters, all the best fighters in boxing in their stable. And therefore, they don't need to go outside their stable and have too many fights against superstar fighters because all the best fighters are in their stable. If their guy doesn't fight Canelo Alvarez, they can say, well, how do you know Canelo is better than our guy? He hasn't beaten our guy. They've always got this plausible deniability. As absurd as it would seem to the majority of neutral people, that's the game that PBC like to play. That's certainly the game they played with Deontay Wilder. Anthony Joshua had all these belts, but PBC managed to manipulate public perception to such a degree that people were dismissing the fact that AJ had fought a much higher caliber of opposition than Deontay Wilder, much earlier on in his career as well, and that he had multiple belts when Wilder only had one. They got people dismissing all that and believing that PBC had the best heavyweight in the world in Deontay Wilder. You see, they like playing that game. And this is why, in my view, they keep some of their fighters away from top fighters who are with other promotional companies and on other networks in many instances. Because they feel like, what do we really need to risk that for? We can convince people that our guy's the best without fighting their guy. You see it. Anyway, I'm out. I'm in the process of moving abroad, so I need to sell most of my stuff, and that includes quite a few pairs of boxing gloves. In this case, sparring gloves. These are the Vasyl Lomachenko edition of the Rival Guerrero sparring gloves. These were a limited edition. They don't make them anymore. Rival still make Guerreros, but not the Lomachenko branded ones. So these are now a collector's item. So if you would like to purchase these gloves, head on over to the eBay store, which is linked below in the description, and also I'll pin it in the comments at the top. They're still in good condition despite the fact that I have used them. The padding's in great condition, the leather's in good condition. There are a few very small superficial scuffs to these screen printed graphics, but the leather itself is in great nick, the padding's in great nick. You could use them for sparring and training, absolutely no problem at all. Or you could keep them as a collector's item because these are very rare now, so the opportunity to own a pair will not come along very often. But this is one such opportunity, so make sure you head over to the eBay store to place your bids, and maybe you could get these signed by Vasyl Lomachenko himself. And of course, over time, they're almost certainly going to increase in value exponentially, particularly if Lomachenko goes on to have an even more impressive career than he's had so far. So click the link in the description or in the pinned comment at the top and check out these gloves on the eBay store. Bang them together again, just make sure yep, see, harder. Because see, the padding is good. Padding's still good. All right.